How's it going, guys? Talking from Where Search 1000. Today is August 22nd, 2020, and we're tracking Tropical Storm Marco and Tropical Storm Laura right now, which have a chance of making landfall at the exact same location at the exact same time. So let's get right into it by talking about Tropical Storm Marco, which is currently just off the coast of the western tip of Cuba and just to the northeast currently of the Yucatan Peninsula, and pretty much has surprised everyone because the initial forecast of Tropical Storm Marco was that it would move very slowly, maybe meander over the Yucatan Peninsula and then moving into the Gulf and then move a little bit more west, but it's now moving a lot further north than expected, and as a result, the forecast models and the forecast track has completely shifted more towards the more towards the northward track, where it will make landfall in a more in a state that's more eastward. And it's also a lot stronger than initially expected, since it was initially thought that this will be much weaker heading into the westerly direction, as it wouldn't get as much of an effect by the upper level flow that's currently dominating the Gulf of Mexico, since with weaker storms they have low cloud tops. But it seems like this storm is a lot stronger than initially expected, and as a result it's feeling a lot more of that upper level flow to make that's forcing this storm a little bit more northward than expected. And in terms of the overall composition of this storm, you see that there's a lot of convection that's occurring. However, there's still a lot of pockets of dry air with this, but it's still expected to become a hurricane, since over the past several hours, it's been strengthening quite, I wouldn't say rapidly, but it's been developing quite gradually, and it doesn't seem like it's going to stop anytime soon, even with this dry air, and it seems like this upper level flow and the dry air that's currently just to the west of it at this point is not enough to really weaken this in the near future. However, eventually it may, as it continues up northward, but as of right now, it seems like there's a lot of convection that's occurring, and despite the dry air that's entraining it, it still seems like it's a strengthening storm and could become a hurricane as early as tonight, as it's currently a 65-mile-per-hour storm, with its millibar pressure now down to 992 millibars, and it's expected to strengthen in the short-term future. And as a result of being so close to western Cuba, there's tropical storm warnings issued, as flash flooding and tropical storm force winds and some high surf is definitely expected over Cuba. And Mexico, for the most part, has been spared by much of the impact of Tropical Storm Marco, as this storm obviously went further to the east. So you might be asking, what does this shift in the forecast mean for the entire Gulf of Mexico, and what impact could you expect in a certain state? So let's first find out on the forecast of this future strength forecast of this, because that's definitely going to determine how much impacts you will face from Tropical Storm Marco. And it doesn't seem like this will rapidly intensify over the Gulf of Mexico, like let's say a Katrina or a Harvey, because there's just a lot of wind shear and just a lot of dry air that's going to hinder it from really developing much more than it is right now, based off of what we're seeing. However, that could change, and it all depends on this ridge that's going to be towards the eastern portion of Florida, because if that ridge could build a little bit more towards the west, and if it could get a little bit stronger, then it might force this trough that's currently dominating the Gulf of Mexico a little bit further north at a faster rate, to the point where Marco might have a little bit more of an open lane to maybe strengthen to more than maybe a strong tropical storm or a low-end category 1 hurricane, which is the current concession from most of the consensus from most of the computer models at this point. But if we take a look at the current forecast from GFS, you see that the wind shear mainly stays close in proximity to Marco throughout its life, and it's the reason why the GFS isn't really lenient on really developing this much, and in fact weakening it before it makes landfall, since this trough is just gonna continue to stay with Marco all throughout the next 36 hours, and it would mainly weaken it as it's making landfall, which is a current which is a current forecast right now for most of the computer models. If we take a look at the relative humidity, the other problem that Marco is going to deal with over the next several days is the dry air that's entrained with it behind this chop. Because if we move forward, you see that the dry air begins to entrain the southwestern portion of this storm, and that's going to make the air a little bit more stable around the center of circulation, and thus making it a weaker storm. There's going to be less convection with stable air and less wind as a result, because this air is more stable, and as a result, just an overall weaker storm thanks to the dry air that's expected to be that's expected to slow this thing down from the southern side of this storm, and it might be one of those cases where this storm is going to be very lopsided, where we might see most of the precipitation towards the northeastern portion of the storm, while the western and especially the southern portion of this storm will be a little bit more drier. And tropical cyclones don't really develop very strong if they're very lopsided. They need an equal amount of low pressure all throughout the center, and it does seem like that's going to happen as a result of this dry air. However, it all really depends on how much this ridge that's currently dominating the eastern coast of Florida. It really depends on how strong it is, because if it's stronger, it may force that wind shear up north. However, most of the computer models are expecting this wind shear to stay in the Gulf Coast, which is definitely good news since we don't want to see a stronger storm. And the chances of this making landfall as a hurricane are less likely at this point. Even with the National Hurricane Center predicting that this will still make landfall as a hurricane, it's still fairly possible. But I'm not too sure if Marco will be able to deal with this dry air and this wind shear for that long. And since Marco is relatively small, while due to the small circulation of Marco, it's less likely to entrain a lot of dry air within its center of circulation. There comes a point where small storms, when there's too much dry air, they could completely die off, and that's certainly while I don't think this will completely die off like the GFS might be stating, but I do expect that it could be easily weakened since just enough wind shear could completely weaken a small circulation, and Marco currently has that fortunately, so this could definitely weaken as it heads to the Gulf Coast. However, I would say a landfall around, and in terms of the track forecast, it really all depends also on the strength of this storm as of right now, because if Marco is stronger and grows stronger than initially expected to maybe an 80 or 85 mile per hour hurricane before it encounters some of this upper level flow, then we're more likely to see a track that's more straight up northward instead of a northwestward track. Because since the storm's stronger, there's higher cloud tops, and we're more likely to see a mid-level low, and up in the higher elevations of the atmosphere, and it's more likely to experience some of the upper level winds and be affected by the upper level winds. And currently the upper level winds are coming from the south to the north, which would steer this storm, if it were stronger and had higher cloud tops, mainly more towards the north. However, if this storm weakens earlier than expected and it becomes weaker, then we're more likely to see a track a little bit more to the northwest, because the upper level flow won't have much an effect on this storm, since the cloud tops are lower, since it's weaker, and it's more likely to and its track is more likely to be determined by the lower level flow that's currently dominating most of the Atlantic and part of the Gulf of Mexico at this point, to where somewhere track more westward will be more likely. However, the most likely scenario of where Marco will make landfall is, I would say, between western Louisiana and maybe towards the border of Mississippi and Alabama, or maybe even Alabama, because this storm has pretty much blown all expectations and pretty much proven that it's has been very unpredictable. So it could be another one of those unpredictable scenarios where it could make landfall as far east as Alabama or maybe the Florida Panhandle. However, I think the most likely case is that it makes landfall somewhere between Mississippi and Louisiana. So definitely watch out for that. And I could say with confidence that Louisiana, Mississippi, and even Alabama, you will experience an enhanced rainfall threat heading into next week. I would say around the Monday timeframe, you should expect impacts from Tropical Storm Marco, as around Monday, Marco should be right around Louisiana and Mississippi's doorstep. However, it could change. Maybe it comes a little earlier, since Marco has been moving a little bit more faster than expected, or it could come a little later. This storm's very unpredictable, but I could say with confidence at least a heavy rainfall threat is expected, and likely tropical storm force conditions and maybe hurricane force conditions are possible. But I would at least prepare for tropical storm force conditions from Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana as of right now. And you don't want to underestimate these tropical storms either, because they could dump a lot of rain and create some high surf, as currently 3 to 5 feet of storm surge is expected through Mississippi, Louisiana, and even 2 to 4 feet is expected on the southern coast of Louisiana. So prepare now if you're along the Gulf Coast, because it's becoming likely that you will experience tropical storm force conditions all throughout the Gulf Coast. And I'm not even including Laura or the possibility that Marco could strengthen into a hurricane, which is definitely a possibility, but at least prepare for tropical storm force conditions now, I would say, for the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And in terms of the expected rainfall from Marco, you could see that this as of the 120-hour rainfall forecast, which may include Laura, because Laura is expected to be just at Louisiana or Mississippi's doorstep by maybe Tuesday. However, it's still subject to change, but you could see that 5 to 10 inches are easily possible throughout Louisiana and Mississippi over the next 5 days. So flash flooding is definitely possible. If you're in a flood prone area, make sure to prepare and make sure to take precautions. And it's better to be safe and sorry along the Gulf Coast. And I would pay attention pretty much from the Florida Panhandle all the way to Texas for both Tropical Storm Marco and Laura. So now let's move on to Tropical Storm Laura, which is currently, now it seems like it's currently just off the coast of Puerto Rico, and it's really hard to identify where the center of circulation is. However, over the past several hours, I've been identifying a little bit of a circulation just to the east of it, and I've noticed that it seems to be going towards a northerly direction, which definitely won't be good news if we see a low pressure system move just to the north of the Dominican Republic, because it'll be a similar situation to Tropical Storm Isaias, where Tropical Storm Isaias, while the original eye made landfall in Dominican Republic, a new eye completely formed from just over the northern coast of Dominican Republic. So it pretty much the hope that this storm, that Isaias, would have weakened over the higher elevations of Dominican Republic was pretty much dashed as soon as the new center circulation of Isaias formed just to the north. And really the storm didn't weaken at all going over Dominican Republic because a new eye formed. And that's currently the fear for me, because if this storm, if the center of circulation moves to north of Dominican Republic and pretty much forms a new center of circulation to the north of the Dominican Republic, or this storm or this eye maintains its track north of the Dominican Republic, then it's possible we may see a stronger tropical storm enter the Gulf of Mexico later during the week, which will make it more favorable to develop into a hurricane, and potentially a stronger hurricane, not just maybe a low-end hurricane. And that's currently the worry. However, there's still a lot of factors to determine whether this will go over land or not, because over the past several hours, I've also been noticing a lot more convection towards the western side of this storm, more towards the Dominican Republic, and it seems like maybe it could develop a new low-level center within this area of convection, because with tropical cyclones, when there's an area of convection that produces an area that has a lower pressure than what the original center has, then it's very possible that the original center could jump into that new lower pressure area and then completely jump and move towards a new area. And if we're seeing a blow up of convection, just enough to where the pressure in this convection area is lower than that of the original center, then we may see the original center jump into this area, and as a result might go a little bit more over the high terrain of the Dominican Republic and Haiti, which would mean that it's more likely we're going to see a weaker storm enter the Gulf, and as a result less of a threat to the Gulf of Mexico, and overall less of a threat to maybe Cuba and potentially the coast of the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and a weaker storm overall, which would be good news mainly for everybody. However, there's still, so over the next 24 hours, it's going to be very interesting to see what this storm does, because if it takes the track up northward, then that could mean trouble for the future of this storm and whoever's in its path. However, if it goes over land, then it's less likely we're going to see a stronger storm enter the Gulf of Mexico. And while I do still expect it to strengthen into a hurricane either way, it would likely be a weaker hurricane and not as bad. So the next 24 hours are definitely key for the future of this storm. And as for what's going on right now in Dominican Republic, Haiti, Puerto Rico, definitely prepare for flooding. And while the storm is currently at 50 miles per hour, I'd assume that it's a little stronger than that, because there was a weather station in Puerto Rico that reported a sustained wind of 60 miles per hour with a wind gust of up to 75. So I'd assume that it's a little bit stronger, especially with this convection starting to blow up, and it looks fairly healthy for the most part, I would say. And in terms of the dry air, there's going to be a little bit of dry air that won't really that's going to pretty much put a cap on how much this will strengthen in the short-term future. However, once it enters the Gulf, it's going to enter very favorable conditions, which is definitely scary. Let me show you guys the wind shear map to give you guys an idea of how favorable the conditions will be. And if we move forward, you see that for the most part, the wind shear is very light and the conditions seem very favorable. There won't be that much dry air to stop it, and it's just going to be over the open Gulf to where it could strengthen and make landfall as a pretty strong, maybe major hurricane around the Gulf of Mexico. There's still a lot of uncertainty of where this will go, how strong this will be, and a lot could change because within 3 to 5 days with the wind shear forecast. However, it seems likely that we will see a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico from Laura, and it will become right behind Marco, which is quite rare to see two tropical cyclones make landfall within the same area. So definitely watch out for that on the Gulf Coast, since you may see a stronger hurricane next week. And in terms of the National Hurricane Center track of Tropical Storm Tropical Storm Laura, you see that it's expected to become a hurricane. And while the National Hurricane Center track is moving the storm's eye over these islands, I wouldn't be surprised if this completely stays off the track and forms a new eye that moves north of the islands, which would be definitely much more worrisome. And But as for the Gulf Coast, I would at least be watching because a strong hurricane is becoming likely in those areas. But anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe for more content and make sure to share with friends and family who are interested and prepare now along the Gulf Coast. As for not only Marco but Laura, because you don't know if you'll have enough time between those two storms to prepare for potentially Laura, which could make landfall somewhere along the Gulf Coast. So definitely keep in mind of that and stay safe. And I hope you guys have a good day.